The HOA demolished my houseboat for refusing to pay their fake HOA fees, and I was forced to watch. I saw a crane tear apart the home my late wife and I built together, splintering her name right off the side. The HOA president just stood on the dock, smirking, as she called my life's work an eyesore. She thought she was the queen of the Marina. What she didn't know was that while she was busy destroying my property, she was standing on hers. She was about to find out who owned the very water her docks were floating on. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this takedown is one for the history books. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them getting exactly what they deserve. The first thing I heard that morning wasn't the gulls. It was a low rumble, the kind that vibrates through the water and up into the hull of your home. For a second, half asleep, I thought it was a big container ship passing too close in the channel. But this was different. It was closer. I pushed myself up from my bunk, the old wood of the Lila May groaning a familiar good morning. I'd built every inch of this boat with my own 2 hands, and I knew its every sound. This new one didn't belong. I pulled on my jeans and walked into the galley, the smell of salt water and coffee my usual alarm clock. But when I looked out the porthole, I saw it. A bright yellow bulldozer was sitting on the access road, its engine idling, puffing out little clouds of diesel smoke into the clean morning air. Beyond it, a flatbed truck with a crane was backing into the main parking lot. My parking lot. I poured my coffee, my hand steady as it always is, but a cold knot was forming in my gut. I'd retired from the Navy after 30 years as an engineer. I'd fixed engines in the middle of typhoons and welded ruptured hulls 100 feet underwater. I don't get rattled. But this felt wrong. This felt like an invasion. I stepped out onto the deck, the cool morning mist on my face. That's when I saw them. 2 people in those ridiculously bright reflective vests, holding clipboards like they were shields. A man and a woman. The woman was in charge, you could tell from a mile away. She wore a sharp gray pantsuit under the vest, her hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jake Lawson?" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut mooring lines. I just nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm Marla Creer, president of the Lakeshore Homeowners Association. This is Sandy, our treasurer." The other woman, Sandy, just gave a little wave, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Marla pointed her pen at my houseboat. "We're here about your vessel. It's in violation of shoreline HOA covenants." I almost laughed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, there is no HOA here. This is a private marina. I own my slip, and I pay my property taxes to the county, not to some committee. I'd been here for 20 years. My wife, Lila, and I had bought the slip, right after she got the all clear from the doctors. We built this boat as her recovery project, a place where the water could wash away the memories of chemo wards and sterile hospital rooms. She'd named it the Lila May herself. She'd passed 5 years ago, but this boat was more than a home. It was the last piece of her I had. Marla's fake smile tightened. The shoreline properties were recently incorporated under our jurisdiction. That includes marina access. According to our records, you are 3 years in arrears on your HOA dues. You also never submitted your vessel's plans for architectural review. Frankly, it's an unsightly structure, and it's not compliant with community standards. Unsightly. She called the home my wife designed an unsightly structure. I kept my voice level. It's an old Navy trick. The angrier you are, the quieter you get. I've never received a notice. I've never been invited to a meeting, and I've never signed any agreement with you or your HOA. I went inside and came back with a waterproof folder. I pulled out my marina lease and my latest property tax receipt from the county. This is my lease. These are my tax papers. My business with the government is settled. My business with you is non-existent. She didn't even glance at them. She just waved a dismissive hand, like my legal documents were a fly buzzing around her head. Those are obsolete. We have jurisdiction now. The dues, plus penalties, come to $14,672. You can pay by check or card. Sandy, the treasurer, held up a small credit card reader. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like a pirate showing up and demanding you pay for the ocean. "I'm not paying you a dime," I said, my voice dropping. "And I'd appreciate it if you and your construction equipment got off my property." Marla's smile finally vanished. The mask was off. Mr. Lawson, you seem to misunderstand your position. You're a tenant here, at our discretion. This boat is a safety hazard and a visual blight. If you refuse to pay what you owe, we will have it condemned and removed. You are trespassing. The threat hung in the air, heavy and thick like engine smoke. She was threatening to destroy my wife's memory. She was threatening to erase the last place on earth that felt like her. That's when the rage, cold and clear, finally settled in. They thought I was just some old man, a renter they could push around. They had no idea who I was, or what this place truly was. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, I said, turning to go back inside. You do that, she called after me. But the clock is ticking. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone, trying to get answers. But it was like punching smoke. The county clerk had never heard of a shoreline HOA having jurisdiction over the water lots. My neighbors in the other slips just looked at the ground when I asked them about it. They were scared. They'd been paying. Later that afternoon, a young guy in a cheap uniform knocked on my hull. He wasn't a cop, just one of those rent-a-guards. He didn't say a word. He just peeled the back off a bright orange sticker and slapped it right on the door to my cabin. Demolition notice. I tore it off, but the glue left a nasty, ugly scar on the wood. I stared at that orange piece of paper, a declaration of war. They thought they could just show up, invent some rules, and tear a man's life apart. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I was making a call to an old Navy buddy who did land surveying when I heard the crane engine fire up again. I stepped outside. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the docks. The giant yellow arm of the crane was swinging over my houseboat, a dark shadow passing over Lila's nameplate. A heavy steel hook, big enough to lift a tank, was being lowered slowly, deliberately. It swayed back and forth, a pendulum marking the last seconds of my peaceful life. I stood there on the deck, my phone still in my hand, watching it descend. There was a loud, metallic clank as the hook caught the edge of my deck railing. The whole boat shuddered. Then came a sound that broke my heart, a deep, splintering groan from the timbers, the sound of a home crying out in pain. That hook on the railing was just a warning. They left it there for an hour, a metal vulture waiting. I knew what they were doing. It was a power play, meant to intimidate me, to make me run up to the office with a checkbook in my shaking hands. But my hands weren't shaking. They were making calls. First, I called the county planning and zoning department. A tired-sounding woman on the other end of the line spent 20 minutes clicking through her computer. Lawson, Marina lots. Yep, I see you here. No, sir. No shoreline HOA has filed for jurisdiction over those water plots. Not in our system. I asked her to check the parent company for the Lakeshore Homeowners Association. Another 10 minutes of clicking. It's a shell corporation, she said, her voice a little more interested now. Registered to a P.O. box. The registered agent is a real estate group called Creer Properties. Bingo, Marla Creer. This wasn't about community standards. It was a land grab, dressed up in a pantsuit. My next calls were to my neighbors, the handful of other full-time live-aboards. It was like talking to ghosts. Look, Jake, I can't get involved, one of them mumbled, the sound of his generator rattling in the background. They threatened to cut my shore power. I've got kids. Another just hung up. They were good people, but they were trapped. Marla had found their leverage point and squeezed. I walked down the dock to the bait and tackle shop, a little shack at the end of the pier run, by Bill Reyes. Bill was a wiry old guy who'd been wounded in Vietnam and had been selling shrimp and telling lies ever since. He was cleaning a fish, the scales flying like silver dust in the afternoon sun. I told him what happened. He didn't stop his work, just kept the knife moving with a steady hand. They came for me about 5 years back, he said, not looking up. Not for HOA fees. It was a zoning thing. Said my shop was a commercial nuisance next to the new condos they were building. He finally paused, wiping the blade on a rag. They started small. A notice about the paint color on my sign. A fine because my crab pots were stacked too high. Then they took everything. He gestured vaguely toward the shoreline condos gleaming in the sun. He wasn't just a tenant in the bait shop. He'd owned the whole pier once. Now he just rented his own spot back from them. Don't let them tell you what you are, Jake, he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. You tell them. I went down to the sheriff's office next. A young deputy with a well-fed belly listened to my story, nodding slowly like I was telling him a long, boring joke. He took my statement, my lease, a copy of the deed for my slip. He looked at the orange demolition notice. He sighed. "Look, sir," he said, handing my papers back. "As far as we can tell, this is a civil matter. It's your word against theirs. You need to get a lawyer." He said it with the kind of finality that meant, "Please leave now." It was the official bureaucratic version of "not my problem." That night, I called a guy named Mason Trent. He was a sharp real estate attorney, the kind who wore suits that cost more than my truck. I'd helped him out a few years back when the pump system for his yacht's air conditioning went out on the 4th of July weekend. I spent 6 hours in his engine room, covered in grease, and got it running. He'd tried to pay me, but I just told him to remember me if I ever needed a hand. He remembered. By 9 the next morning, Mason had drafted and sent a cease and desist letter via courier. It was a beautiful thing, full of sharp-edged legal words that basically translated to, "Touch my client's boat and I'll own yours." For the first time in 2 days, I felt a flicker of hope. I had the law on my side. I had a lawyer. I had the truth. For one afternoon, the marina was quiet. The bulldozer was silent. The crane sat dormant. It felt like a truce. But I was dealing with a bully, and bullies don't do truces. They just reload. The answer came just after sunset. Not a letter, not a phone call. It came in the form of massive portable floodlights firing up, turning my little corner of the marina into a nightmare stage. They lit up the Lila May in a harsh white glare, erasing all the warmth of the wood, making it look like a specimen under a microscope. Marla was there, standing with the bulldozer operator, her arms crossed. I saw them give the signal. The bulldozer roared to life, its heavy, steel blade pushing against the gangplank, snapping the hinges with a sharp crack. It was a clean break. I was cut off. Then the crane started. It wasn't gentle this time. The backhoe attachment, a giant claw of steel teeth, swung through the air and slammed into the side of the galley. Wood exploded. My wife's favorite window, the one she loved to watch the sunrise through, shattered into a million pieces. They tore into it, piece by piece. The roof of the main cabin was peeled back like the lid of a tin can. The mast I'd spent a month shaping was snapped in two. I just stood on the dock, 50 feet away, a barrier of orange cones and a smug security guard between me and my home. The rain started, a cold, miserable drizzle, mixing with the diesel fumes. I could barely see through it, but I saw the moment the claw swung around to the stern. It caught the carved wooden nameplate, the one Lila had designed herself, with the little wave curling under her name. The oak splintered. The letters LILA fell away into the dark water. And then the rest of it was gone. They were destroying a memory. They were murdering a ghost. I stood there in the pouring rain until they were done, until all that was left was a floating pile of garbage, a wreck of broken beams and shattered dreams. As the floodlights shut off, plunging the dock back into darkness, I looked at the wreckage and said it out loud, to the rain, to the night, to Lila. "They think I'm just a tenant." I climbed over the safety rail, my old boots splashing in the oily water. I waded through the debris, my hands searching in the dark for what I knew was still there. Under a splintered floorboard, I felt it, a cold, hard rectangle. I pulled it out. It was a small steel lockbox, dented and scarred, but still sealed tight. The one I'd bolted to the main support beam 20 years ago. I carried it back to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and clicked it open. Inside, sealed in a waterproof bag, was the original deed to the marina itself. The paper I signed when I bought not just a slip, but the submerged land underneath the entire dock system. I didn't sleep in my truck. I drove it 10 miles inland to a small workshop I'd rented for years, a cinderblock garage where I rebuilt classic marine engines. It was a place of order, where every tool had its place and every problem had a mechanical solution. The smell of oil and steel was clean compared to the stench of wet, splintered wood and diesel fumes back at the marina. Grief is a strange engine. It can either flood and stall you out, or it can burn hot and clean, turning sorrow into focused energy. As I sat at my workbench under the cold fluorescent light, that's what I felt. The hollow ache in my chest was still there, a crater where the Lila May used to be, but inside that crater, a flame was catching. I smoothed the old deed out on the scarred wooden surface. It was 20 years old, the paper soft and creased at the folds. The lawyer, who handled the sale back then, was a stickler for details. a retired Navy JAG officer who believed in triple-checking everything. Lila and I had been young and just happy to have our own slice of the water. I remembered him pointing to a long, dense paragraph of legal text. "Pay attention to this part, son," he'd said. "Most people just buy the slip. The old man who owned this marina before was selling the whole foundation. You're not just buying access to the water, you're buying the ground underneath it." At the time, it seemed like a strange detail. Now, it was everything. I read the words slowly, tracing them with my finger. "Hereby transfers all rights and titles to submerged lots, 7 through 12, inclusive of the Marina Basin Foundation and all affixed structures thereupon." It wasn't just my slip. It was the land under the entire T-dock. The pilings driven deep into the lake bed weren't marina property. They were my property. The floating walkways people used to get to their boats weren't HOA common areas. They were affixed structures on my lots. Marla hadn't just destroyed my boat. She had brought heavy machinery onto my land, conducted a demolition on my land, and was now trying to govern my land. My anger wasn't hot. It was cold and precise, like calibrating a delicate instrument. I needed to be sure. At dawn, I called Mike Stavros, a guy I served with in the Corps of Engineers. He was a surveyor, a master of lines and boundaries. "Jake, man, it's been a while. You still messing with those old diesel engines?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "I've got a new project, Mike," I said. "I'm going to email you a legal description from a deed. I need you to cross-reference it with the official county plat maps. I need to know, down to the inch, where my property line ends." I didn't tell him why. I didn't need to. He knew my voice. "Sounds serious?" he said. "I'll have it for you by end of day." While I waited, I drove back to the marina, parking in the public lot across the street. I just sat and watched. It was like watching ants colonize a picnic. Marla's little kingdom was in full swing. Her security guard was strutting up and down the main pier. Sandy, the treasurer, was taping new violation notices to other boaters' dock boxes. One was for unapproved dock ornamentation, a string of small solar-powered lights. Another was for water encroachment because the family in Slip 9 had their inflatable kayak tied up alongside their boat. They were manufacturing infractions to justify their existence, creating problems only they could solve with a fine. The anger was spreading. You could see it in the way people walked, their shoulders hunched, their eyes avoiding each other. Fear does that. But I also saw Bill Reyes from the bait shop, standing at the end of his pier, watching them. He wasn't scared. He was waiting. Later that afternoon, I saw a young couple, the Hendersons, who ran a kayak rental business from the smallest slip. Their dock lines had been cut during the night, and 2 of their kayaks were drifting free in the marina. The HOA guard was writing them a ticket for unsecured vessels. I walked over as the guard left. The husband, Ben, was pulling the kayaks back in, his face tight with frustration. "This is insane," his wife Clara said, her voice shaking a little. I just nodded and pointed to the frayed end of the rope. "Clean cut. That wasn't a chafe," I said. I spent 20 minutes with them, showing them how to splice the lines to make them stronger. As I left, I looked Ben in the eye. "Don't let them make you feel powerless," I told him quietly. "When I move all at once. Just be ready." He didn't know what I meant, but he nodded. He understood it was a promise. Back in my workshop that evening, Mike's email came in. It had a single attachment, a high-resolution PDF of the county map, overlaid with a bright red line. My property. I printed it out on a large format printer I used for engine schematics and unrolled it across the entire workbench. The sheer size of it took my breath away. It wasn't just the water under the docks. The red line extended out, encompassing the main access pier, the fish cleaning station, and nearly half of the gravel parking lot where Marla's bulldozer had sat. For 5 years, her entire HOA operation, her meetings, her patrols, her extortion, had been conducted while trespassing. I pulled out a set of precision calipers from my toolbox and leaned over the map. I measured the distance from the property line to the spot where the Lila May had been moored. Then, I measured to where the crane had been parked. Finally, I traced the line along the main pier where Marla had stood and watched my home be torn apart. It was all inside the red line. All of it. I picked up my phone, my movements slow and deliberate. It was time to call my lawyer. "Mason," I said when he answered, I think we have more than a cease and desist case. I think we have a trespass case. I leaned over the map, the calipers still in my hand. In fact, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time in days. If this line is right, they've been running their whole illegal protection racket from my front yard. Silence on the other end of the line. Mason Trent, my high-priced lawyer, was completely quiet. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Jake," he finally said, his voice slow and careful, "if that map is certified, if those survey markers hold up, this isn't just a trespass case. This is a complete reversal. She didn't just break the rules. She was never on the field to begin with." He told me to get the survey officially certified and filed with the county registrar. That was the next piece of the puzzle, but word travels fast in a small community. Marla must have sensed something shifting. Maybe she saw me talking to the Hendersons. Maybe one of the neighbors I'd called had a moment of loose talk. Whatever it was, the pressure changed. It was no longer about demolition. It became about me. The harassment was petty at first. I was living out of my truck, sleeping on an old mattress in the back of my workshop. One morning, I came out to find all 4 of my tires slashed. The next day, someone had glued the lock on my workshop door. Little annoyances meant to keep me off balance. Then it escalated. Photos of my wrecked houseboat appeared on the community's social media page, posted by the HOA. The captions were full of careful, poisonous words. Unstable structure removed for public safety. Abandoned vessel posed environmental risk. They were painting me as a negligent, dangerous old man. A friend from my old Navy unit called me. "Jake, what's going on? My insurance agent just called me, said my boat insurance policy is under review because I'm listed as an associate of yours. They said you're a high-risk individual." My own insurance had been canceled a week prior, a letter citing change of risk profile as the reason. It was Marla. She was pulling every string she had, trying to cut me off from the rest of the world, to isolate me until I broke. The worst part was seeing it work. People I'd known for years started to avoid me at the local diner. A couple of my engine repair clients called to cancel their jobs. They were worried. I didn't blame them. Marla was making an example of me, and nobody wanted to be next. I felt like I was in a box and the walls were closing in. I had the truth, locked away in a safe in my workshop, but I couldn't use it yet. The official survey certification was taking time. The county office, it turned out, was experiencing delays. Mason warned me that Marla likely had friends in the local bureaucracy, people who could slow-walk paperwork into oblivion. He filed motions, he made calls, but it was like wading through molasses. One afternoon, feeling lower than I had in years, I stopped by my mailbox at the local post office. It was empty. The certified survey papers from Mike Stavros, which he'd sent by registered mail 2 days earlier, were gone. Not delayed. Gone. The clerk just shrugged. "It says delivered, sir." That was the moment I almost gave up. I was an engineer, a man who believed in systems, in rules, in order. But I was up against a system that was rigged. The law was on my side, but they had stolen the paperwork. My neighbors were on my side, but they were too afraid to speak up. I felt utterly alone, cornered by a bully with a clipboard and an endless supply of cheap tricks. That night, I couldn't face the sterile quiet of my workshop. I drove to the old boatyard, the one where Lila and I had built our home. The yard was closed, but I knew the owner. I let myself in and walked to the back corner, where we kept her memorial plaque. It was just a small brass plate on a piece of weathered driftwood overlooking the water. Tara Lawson, she loved this view. I sat on the old piling next to it, the same one she used to sit on while she watched me work. I pulled a worn photo of her from my wallet, the one where she's laughing, her hair blowing in the wind on the deck of a boat. "They took it, Tara," I whispered to the picture. "They took the Lila May." I sat there for a long time, just talking to her, telling her everything. About Marla, the HOA, the slashed tires, the stolen mail. It felt foolish, talking to a memory. But then I remembered something she said to me when the doctors told her the cancer was back. We were sitting right here, in this spot. I'd been raging, angry at the unfairness of it all. She had just taken my hand and said, "Don't fight the storm, Jake. Be the rock. Build something that lasts, something they can't wash away." I thought she meant the boat, But sitting there, in the dark, with nothing left but a photo and a deed they couldn't find, I realized she meant something else. They could destroy wood and steel, but they couldn't destroy the truth. This fight wasn't just about my boat anymore. It was for Bill Reyes, who lost his pier. It was for the Hendersons and their cut ropes. It was for everyone who'd ever been pushed around by a petty tyrant in a pantsuit. I stood up, the damp night air feeling a little less cold. Be the rock. Build something that lasts. I went back to my workshop, sat down at my bench, and pulled out my laptop. I knew what I had to do. I composed a short, simple email. I attached a scanned copy of the original deed and the legal description Mike had sent me before the hard copies vanished. The email was to Mason, my lawyer. The subject line was just one word: execute. My phone rang less than a minute after I hit send. It was Mason. His voice was all business, no pleasantries. "You sure you want to pull this trigger, Jake? Once we file this, it's war. There's no going back." I looked at the picture of Lila still sitting on my workbench. I looked at the large laminated map with the bright red line drawn around my property, her property, our property. "I've never been sure," I said. "War looks quiet at first. For 3 weeks nothing happened. The harassment stopped. No more slashed tires, no more fake social media posts. The silence was more unnerving than the noise. I knew Mason was working, filing papers, making legal moves in a world I didn't understand. He told me not to go near the marina, to stay patient, to trust the plan. Trusting was hard. Patience was harder. I spent the time in my workshop, cleaning my tools, organizing parts, doing anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from circling the drain of grief and anger. Then I got the email from Bill Reyes. It was just 2 sentences. "HOA meeting tonight. Mandatory. You should come." I called Mason. "It's time," he said. "The table is set." I put on a clean shirt, tucked my work boots into a fresh pair of jeans, and drove to the community clubhouse on the shore, the one Marla used as her throne room. The place was packed, standing room only. Every shoreline homeowner, every scared boat owner was there. Marla was at the front, flanked by Sandy the treasurer and a couple of other board members who looked like they'd been chosen for their ability to nod on command. Marla was radiating smug satisfaction. She tapped the microphone, a sharp sound that cut through the nervous chatter. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice dripping with condescending authority. "As you know, we have worked diligently to improve the safety and aesthetic value of our community." She went on for 10 minutes, a long speech about property values and compliance, all while staring directly at me, a wolf marking its territory. I just stood quietly at the back of the room, my hands in my pockets, and let her talk. "And now to the final item on our agenda," she said, her smile widening. "To continue our beautification efforts, the board has approved a new special assessment for dock maintenance and access fees. This will apply to all residents with marina privileges." A low groan went through the crowd. Sandy the treasurer started passing out invoices. That was my cue. I raised my hand. Marla pretended not to see me at first, but a few people in the crowd turned to look, and a murmur started. Finally, she sighed, a theatrical display of impatience. "Yes, Mr. Lawson? Do you have a question?" I walked slowly from the back of the room, every eye on me. The silence was total. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of her podium. My voice, when I spoke, wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of that room. "It's not a question," I said calmly. "It's a statement. You're billing my neighbors for access to docks you don't own." Marla blinked, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. The docks are community property." "No," I said, my voice as solid as a block of steel. "They're not." I reached into the canvas bag I was carrying and pulled out a long, heavy tube. I unrolled it across the table in front of her. It was the certified county plat map, laminated 4 feet long. The bright red line marking my property was impossible to miss. "This," I said, tapping the map, "is the official county registered survey of submerged lots 7 through 12. A gasp rippled through the room. People stood on their chairs to get a better look. "This red line," I continued, tracing it with my finger, "shows the boundaries of Lawson Maritime Holdings, LLC, a company I happen to own. And as you can see, it includes the entire marina basin, the main access pier, and all affixed walkways." I looked up from the map and met Marla's eyes. They were wide now, the smugness replaced by a dawning horror. "For the past 5 years," I said, my voice steady and clear, "your homeowners association has been illegally collecting fees, issuing fines, and conducting demolitions on private property. My private property." I let that sink in. The whispers in the room grew louder. People were pulling out their phones, recording. "My attorney has already filed the official trespass notices with the county sheriff," I went on. "We have also filed a civil suit demanding full reimbursement for all fees collected, plus punitive damages for the destruction of my home." Sandy the treasurer dropped her stack of invoices. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Marla found her voice, a high, panicked squeak. "This is absurd! You can't just... This is our HOA! We have bylaws!" She started laughing, a strange, hysterical sound. It was the laugh of someone who has just realized the ground beneath their feet was never there. I just looked at her. "Not anymore," I said. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a thick legal document. I placed it on the map right in front of her. It was a cease and desist order, signed by a judge that very afternoon. "Effective at midnight tonight," I announced to the room, "the Lakeshore Homeowners Association will no longer have access to the Marina facilities. Your key cards for the security gate will be deactivated. Any member of your organization found on my property will be arrested for trespassing." The room erupted, not in anger, in applause. It started with one person, then another. Then the whole room was on its feet, clapping, cheering. The fear was gone, replaced by a wave of intoxicating relief. Bill Reyes was standing on a chair, whistling like it was VJ Day. The Hendersons were hugging each other, laughing. For a moment, Marla just stood there, her face a mask of disbelief. Then the mask cracked. Raw, undiluted fury took its place. She grabbed her purse, pushed past me, and stormed out of the clubhouse. I watched her go. Through the big plate glass window, I saw her pull out her phone and dial, her face twisted in a snarl. She was shouting into the phone, her words lost to the glass and the cheering crowd. I couldn't hear what she said, but I knew what it meant. This wasn't over. I had won the battle, but she was about to start a war. Marla Creer wasn't the type to retreat. Bullies don't back down. They double down. Her war started not with a bang, but with a phone call. The next morning, a man from the county environmental inspector's office showed up at the Marina gate. He was young, nervous, and holding a clipboard that looked way too big for him. He said they'd received an anonymous tip about a significant hazardous materials spill at my property. I knew it was Marla. It was her classic move. Use the bureaucracy as a weapon. But I was ready. "A spill? Really? Where?" I asked, keeping my voice friendly. He pointed vaguely toward the water. "Near the, docks." Mason had warned me this might happen. So, the night before, with the help of Bill Reyes and the Hendersons, I had installed a series of high-definition, night vision security cameras at key points all over the marina. They were small, easy to miss, and they recorded everything. I led the inspector to my workshop, sat him down with a cup of coffee, and played back the footage from 3 a.m. The video was crystal clear. It showed 2 figures sneaking onto the access pier. One was Marla's pet security guard, Carl Benson, the fake cop with the beer belly. The other figure, smaller and more hesitant, was Sandy the treasurer. The camera caught them rolling 3 55-gallon drums down the pier. They opened the lids and tipped them over, pouring a thick, dark liquid into the water right next to the wreckage of the Lila May. The young inspector just stared at the screen, his coffee forgotten. His face went pale. Those are our official county evidence seals on those barrels," he stammered. "They were from a cleanup site downtown. They're supposed to be in a secure lockup." It was worse than just planting a fake spill. They had stolen evidence from a real one. The inspector left without another word, moving much faster than when he'd arrived. 2 days later, Marla called for an emergency town hall meeting. She was trying to get ahead of the story, to paint me as the villain before the truth could get its boots on. The meeting was announced as a forum to address the illegal takeover of community assets by a hostile private entity. That was me. She booked the high school auditorium and alerted the local news. She wanted a public execution. What she didn't know was that I wanted one too. The auditorium was even more crowded than the clubhouse had been. Marla had her supporters there, a few dozen shoreline homeowners who looked just as angry and entitled as she did. The local news had a camera set up in the back. Marla took the stage like a conquering hero, her voice filled with manufactured outrage. She spoke about community safety and established protocols. She accused me of using a legal loophole to seize property that belonged to the people. She was good. She was very convincing. All the while, I sat in the front row, not saying a word, just watching her. When she finished, to a round of applause from her followers, she pointed a dramatic finger at me. "Mr. Lawson has threatened our way of life," she declared. "What does he have to say for himself?" That was her mistake. She gave me the stage. I walked up, not with a map this time, but with a small remote control in my hand. "Marla is right," I said into the microphone. "This is about threats to our community, but the threat isn't me." On the giant screen behind the stage, where Marla had been projecting the HOA logo, a new image appeared, the crystal-clear security footage of Carl and Sandy dumping the oil drums. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The news cameraman zoomed in. I didn't narrate it. I just let it play in dead silence. I let everyone see them plant the evidence. I let them see the official county seals on the barrels just before they were tipped into the water. When the video ended, I put up a still frame from the footage, a perfect close-up of Marla's face as she watched them from the end of the pier, talking on her cell phone. The silence in the room was deafening. Her own supporters were staring at her, their mouths open. The rest of the crowd was turning, a low rumble of anger building. "You filed a false environmental claim," a man's voice called out from the back of the room. A uniformed police officer was walking slowly down the center aisle. Not a rent-a-cop this time, a real one. The same deputy who'd told me my problem was a civil matter weeks ago. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Marla. She sputtered, grabbing the microphone. "This is doctored. It's a fake. He's trying to—" But her voice was drowned out by her own board members. One of them, a man in a golf shirt, stood up. I resign," he said, and practically ran from the stage. Sandy, who was sitting in the front row, started sobbing. Then Carl, the fake cop, tried to bolt for a side exit, but two more officers appeared and blocked his way. The deputy was standing in front of the stage now, looking up at Marla. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Filing a false report is a crime. Tampering with an environmental investigation is a felony. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Marla looked like she'd been struck by lightning. The blood drained from her face. "You can't arrest me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I'm the president of this HOA! I run this community!" The deputy didn't even blink. He just walked up the stage steps as she started to back away. "Not anymore, you don't," I said, my voice quiet, but the microphone picked it up and carried it through the stunned auditorium. He took her arm gently. She didn't struggle. All the fight was gone. As he led her down the steps, her hands cuffed behind her back, the place exploded. It was a roar of pure, cathartic justice. I just stood on the stage, watching them lead her away. Bill Reyes walked up beside me and clapped me on the back. "You did it, Jake," he said. "You took back the docks." I looked out at the cheering crowd, at the faces of my neighbors, no longer afraid. We had won. The sun was coming up as I walked out onto the pier for the first time in weeks. The wreckage of the Lila Mae was still there, a dark, ugly scar on the water. The fight was over, but a new question hung in the quiet morning air. What now? The calm after a storm is a strange thing. For weeks, the Marina had been a battleground. Now, it was just quiet. The news trucks left. The lawyers stopped calling every hour. Marla Creer, I heard, made bail, but was facing a mountain of state and federal charges. Her Lakeshore HOA dissolved overnight, its authority vanishing like smoke. The civil suit Mason filed was settled quickly and quietly. Marla's real estate company, facing complete ruin, agreed to pay for all damages, all back fees extorted from the residents, and a significant punitive settlement. The first check I wrote from that settlement was to a salvage crew. I watched them pull the splintered remains of the Lila Mae from the water. It was a hard day, like burying someone all over again. But it was necessary. I couldn't build something new on a rotten foundation. Wordlessly, my neighbors started to show up. Bill Reyes came first, carrying a thermos of coffee, then the Hendersons, then others, people I barely knew, homeowners from the shoreline, who'd seen the meeting on the news. They didn't say much, they just stood there with me, a quiet, respectful vigil. The old fear was gone, replaced by something that felt a lot like solidarity. With the wreckage cleared, the real work began. I didn't want to just rebuild my home. I wanted to rebuild the community Marla had tried to poison. We held a meeting, not in a stuffy clubhouse, but right there on the main pier. We weren't an HOA, we were just neighbors. We agreed on a simple fair fee for dock maintenance, with the books open for everyone to see. The money left over from the settlement, I used to start something I called the Freedom Dock Fund. It was a small nonprofit, a legal aid service to help veterans and retirees in our county fight back against bogus code enforcement and predatory HOAs. Bill Reyes volunteered to run it. He found a new purpose, a fire I hadn't seen in him in years. Then I started to build. I bought the best marine-grade lumber, the kind that smells like pine and promises to last a lifetime. I laid the keel for the Lila May 2 right there on the pier, in the open for everyone to see. And this time, I wasn't building it alone. One Saturday morning, Ben Henderson showed up with a power sander. "Figured you could use an extra hand," he said. Soon others joined in. An electrician from Slip 12 rewired the shore power for the whole dock, making it safer than it ever had been. A retired carpenter who lived in one of the shoreline homes spent a week helping me frame the cabin, his movements precise and economical. We worked, we talked, we shared lunches on makeshift tables. We were building more than a boat. We were knitting a community back together, one nail, one board at a time. The day we finished, the whole marina turned out. The new boat was almost identical to the first, but stronger, better. We'd used brass fittings instead of steel, reinforced the hull, and added a small solar array on the roof. Clara Henderson had carved a new nameplate, an exact copy of the one Lila had designed. As we fastened it to the stern, I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was ours. That evening, Bill hung a new sign at the entrance to the pier. He'd painted it himself in big block letters. "Welcome to Lawson Marina, a free harbor." Laughter echoed across the water, the sound of kids fishing off the dock, the smell of barbecue in the air. The fear was gone. The clipboards were gone. There was just the quiet hum of a community at peace. A few weeks later, I was sitting on the deck of the new Lila May, watching the sunset paint the water orange and purple. The Hendersons' little girl, Mia, who was about 7, walked carefully down the dock and stopped at my gangplank. She'd been shy around me before, but now she just looked at me with big, curious eyes. "Mr. Jake," she asked, her voice small, "is it true? Do you own all the water?" I smiled. It was the question everyone was too polite to ask, the one that lingered under the surface of our new, quiet life. "No, sweetheart," I said, leaning on the rail. "Nobody owns the water." I looked out at the lake, at the fading light, at the home my friends had helped me build, at the memory of the woman who inspired it all. I just take care of it.